Begin the next statement. Just for the front benches, there are time limits for each of their statements, and in particular Liberal Democrats tend to be running over, so hopefully they realise that they're, I know, not the present front bench folks, but they have been all afternoon, so please keep within time limits. So it's the future of the Post Office Green Paper. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I'd like to make a statement on the Government's response to the results of the future of the Post Office Green Paper. We published the Green Paper in July, starting a national conversation about the future of the Post Office, an institution that has served every community in every corner of the United Kingdom for generations. More than 2,500 people took the time to respond to the consultation, including postmasters, small businesses, service providers, community groups and members of the public. We also held dedicated discussion groups with postmasters and citizens across the country. Let me start then by thanking every respondent. Their views provided a wealth of insight and have been carefully considered. I'm pleased to announce today that we are publishing the Government response to the consultation today. And our response, Madam Deputy Speaker, must echo the clear call that we heard from respondents. They told us that they want a strong and convenient post office network built around permanent, full-time and full-service branches that offer a wide range of essential postal, banking and government services. A post office that is reliable, modern, transparent and that puts postmasters at the heart of decision-making. So today I can confirm that the Government will keep the minimum network size of 11,500 branches and will retain all 6 geographical access criteria, ensuring that communities across the UK, including rural and remote areas, continue to have local and reliable access to postal services. Alongside maintaining the network requirements, we are introducing a new requirement that at least 50% of the network must be full-time and full-service branches. This requirement sets 50% as an absolute minimum, and we expect the Post Office to continue to operate substantially above it. We're setting this requirement to ensure that the full-time, full-service branches remain the backbone of the network for the foreseeable future, as these are the branches that deliver the greatest social value and the strongest customer service. At the same time, we're not blind to the challenges facing the Post Office, and we've built an evidence-based process so that we know when it's the right time for Government to look at the Post Office network again. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, stability requires investment. That's why over the next 2 years the Government is providing up to £483 million to support the transformation of the Post Office. This is on top of the network subsidy funding to support the cost of delivering government policy, which will be £70 million in financial year 26-27. The investment funding will modernise branches across the country, support new in-branch technology and the delivery of new products and services that will make sure the Post Office can do what its customers need it to do, whilst keeping the identity and role at the centre of so many UK high streets. The funding will also enable major technology transformation programme within the next 5 years that will transition operations away from Fujitsu and ultimately replace the Horizon system. Postmasters must be able to trust the technology that they use. It should make their jobs easier and help them to spend their time doing what they do best, serving their local communities. The days of the Post Office relying on outdated systems must end. This programme lays the ground for a modern, resilient and fit-for-purpose organisation. Madam Deputy Speaker, the consultation reinforces the importance of the Post Office for post, of course, but also for banking and access to government services. And so I'd like to address some specific points on each of these. Firstly, on postage. Respondents told us they value the Post Office as a multi-carrier parcel hub and want more choice and convenience in how parcels are sent and received. We will support Post Office's efforts to innovate in this space while ensuring that essential services remain accessible. In banking, the public were clear. The Post Office plays a critical role in ensuring communities have access to cash and in-person banking. Being able to access essential banking services like cash withdrawals and deposits is valuable to many Post Office customers, in particular small businesses, and respondents expressed an appetite to increase their offer. Last month, the Government held discussions between the Post Office and the banking sector to explore where they may be able to work together on a commercial and voluntary basis to better meet the needs of individuals and businesses. Those discussions were based around areas of mutual interest like banking services, financial inclusion, modernisation and the importance of continuing to improve financial crime safeguards, and those conversations are ongoing. Finally, on government services, colleagues will know that many services have moved online, but respondents told us strongly that vulnerable, digitally excluded and rural customers continue to rely on the Post Office for in-person services. In that spirit, we've established a cross-government group to look at developing a common physical front door for government services, expanded assisted digital support and exploring new propositions such as prescription collection and identity verification. At the heart of the Green Paper and of today's government response is the need to strengthen the relationship between the Post Office and postmasters. The Horizon scandal was one of the worst miscarriages of justice in modern British history. While government remains focused on delivering redress to victims as rapidly as possible, we must also ensure that the culture that enabled those wrongs can never return. The Post Office has already taken steps to rebuild trust. The Postmaster Panel, a new consultative council, embedding postmasters in key teams at the Post Office's head office, and the election of postmaster non-exec directors to the board. But we agree with respondents that more is needed. So today I'm confirming that the Post Office will develop a culture strategy with measurable objectives covering employees, postmasters, strategic partners and customers. Government expects this plan to be in place by this summer. To ensure these reforms genuinely meet the needs of postmasters, Government has commissioned an independent external evaluation of the initiatives the Post Office has implemented to strengthen postmaster engagement, and this will report later this year. Madam Deputy Speaker, our long-term goal is a Post Office that is financially sustainable, adaptable to changing markets and less reliant on government funding. But this transition must be responsible and realistic. Respondents were clear that stability comes first, particularly while the Horizon inquiry continues. That's why Government is providing £37 million of funding next financial year to the Post Office to support with the cost of administering redress and responding to the inquiry. While the Green Paper explored long-term governance ideas such as mutualisation or a charter model, the Government won't make any decisions on structural reform until Sir Wyn Williams' final inquiry report. In the meantime, we'll work with the Post Office to ensure that the organisation demonstrates financial discipline, generates a trading profit by 2030 and continues to reduce reliance on taxpayer subsidy while protecting access for communities that depend on it. Madam Deputy Speaker, this Green Paper process and the thousands of responses we received show the enduring importance of the Post Office to the life of this country. The Government's response sets a clear direction. We're maintaining a strong and accessible network. We're backing postmasters through a major investment in cultural reform. We're modernising services for a digital age, and we're setting the Post Office on a path towards long-term financial and operational stability. The Post Office must be modern, resilient and trusted, shaped by the communities it serves and built around the people who run it. With today's response, we take a major step towards that future. I commend this statement to the House.
I call the Shadow Minister, Dame Harriett Baldwin.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement and warmly welcome, I don't often say these words, the decision that the Minister has announced today, because it sounds like they've abandoned the risk that was in the proposals that they shutter thousands of local post offices, especially in rural areas. And so it is very much a relief for villages and high streets that the Government has listened to the people who engaged with the consultation, listened to the 180,000 people who signed our petition and heard the calls from the readers of the Mail on Sunday, the Express, the Telegraph and other media outlets who were all outraged by the possibility that the government might close their much valued local post office. And by keeping the minimum network size at 11,500 branches, as it was throughout the 14 years that we were in government, and keeping all the geographical access criteria, the Minister has avoided a U-turn. In fact, I would describe what he's done as avoiding a chasm that was opening up in the road in front of him and avoiding it niftily. The campaign that we led showed how important it is to voice the concerns of the vulnerable, those who are digitally excluded, and the small businesses who rely so much on our precious post office network. And can I add my thanks to the hard work of every postmaster and postmistress across Britain who keeps that network going. However, it's not all sweetness and light from me today, Madam Deputy Speaker. The post office network, like so many retailers, faces a £45 million hike in their taxes because of national insurance. Many post offices are also seeing increases in their business rates of over 100%. In fact, the chairman of the Post Office, Nigel Railton, was clear when he said that these rising costs from national insurance and the national living wage were exactly why the business needed a fresh start, because you can't claim to support the backbone of the network while breaking its back with tax hikes at the same time. Madam Deputy Speaker, we on this side of the House have always stood up for our nation's high streets, and we would introduce a permanent 100% business rate relief for retail, leisure and hospitality businesses whose premises are under the rateable value threshold of 110,000. Now, I've got a few questions for the Minister. He announced a requirement that at least 50% of the network must be full-time and full service. I believe the number today is 79%, so isn't that a downgrade, and what does he expect from the other 29%? Could he also confirm that no small rural branches will be consolidated and replaced by city centre hubs under the guise of this new 50% full service requirement? Would he please expand on what the minimum service he would expect these smaller branches to deliver? The Minister also committed to the technology transformation programme to replace the Horizon system within the next 5 years. I heard the first 2 years of funding, but could he give us some detail on how the current system will be maintained after those first 2 years? He mentioned the importance of the post office network with the number of banks that are closing branches up and down this country. Has there been a new specific agreement made with the banks to provide additional support to post office branches where banks are closing? And what update can he give the House about the discussions with Fujitsu and their financial contribution towards post office redress? But in closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, clearly the Minister has been forced to listen. He's been forced to do a pre-U-turn, Madam Deputy Speaker, on the proposals to reduce the size of our precious post office network. He's been forced to admit that our high streets do deserve better than the managed decline that was a risk under the previous proposals, and this is a victory for all our constituents.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think if I'm praised much more from that side of the House, I'll get drummed out of the brownies. Can I welcome her response? And I think there is a consensus across the House of the importance that post offices play in our communities, and particularly in our high streets and in our remote villages in particular. I join her as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, in welcoming the campaigning by Mail and Daily Express readers who have made their voice very clear in terms of how important they feel the post office is to our communities. And I echo her words on the importance of, I'm obviously Postal Services Minister and also Small Business Minister, how essential post offices are in terms of having somewhere to drop off your takings if you are a small business. And I think that's incredibly important. She mentions the costs the Post Office are facing, which is a point well taken. We as a government are putting £483 million into the transformation of the Post Office to ensure that it is able to have that financially sustainable future as a business on our high streets and in our villages. She asked specifically about support for the IT transformation within that. Of the over 500 million that the government has committed to transformation, including the money already spent before this Green Paper, up to £136 million is committed to technology and to replacing the Horizon system, which is obviously a major priority for us. But that transformation investment beyond what we're putting into IT will also enable the Post Office to do new things. Often the debate about the Post Office, Madam Deputy Speaker, concentrates on the idea of the Post Office being the last place to do things. And I'm really encouraged, talking to the management of Post Office Limited, that they want the Post Office to be the first place you think of when you think of cash and other services on the high street. She asked about the additional 50% trigger that we have put in, and particularly and completely fairly raises the question of what that would mean for rural areas. So the access criteria in terms of access to the full sort of services that a branch provides are being maintained. So those protections are still there. This is very much an additional protection rather than an alternative to the protections that were already there for rural post offices. And for example, within the 11,500 criteria, drop and collect branches, those branches that don't offer the full service are included within that, but they're not included within the access criteria. So it is about protecting the access to the as full a range of services as possible for those. And then finally, on the point of Fujitsu, I met with Fujitsu shortly before the end of last year, and I made it very clear that we believe, as they have said themselves, that they have a moral responsibility to contribute substantially to the costs of the inquiry. They have said the cost of redress. They've said they wish to wait until Sir Wynn's inquiry before making a decision on that, but we will continue to have those discussions.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I ask the Minister to warmly welcome his statement today? Two specific issues which relate to Post Office in my constituency. Mosborough Post Office, a fairly small one but growing business, but just on the margins of viability. Could you look again at how small post offices in communities which rely on them are supported going forward? And secondly, Woodhouse had the Lloyds Bank, his last bank there, closed. It's an old mining community. We thought it was an ideal place for a banking hub. We had someone willing to run it, Richard Trinder, who's the sub-postmaster at the Handsworth Post Office, but it was turned down because the banks aren't prepared to fund it. So he talked about discussions with the banks and the Post Office on a voluntary agreement that's been brought forward. Could he have a look at what he might do to enforce such agreements and change the criteria for banking hubs in these sorts of situations where they could be really vital to a local community?
He makes an incredibly important point, particularly about those smaller post offices who, as he says, are often the ones who will struggle, who are less able to perhaps invest directly themselves to tackle some of these issues, which is where the money that we're putting into network transformation is so important for them, so that they do become viable businesses where perhaps they might struggle at the moment. The banking roundtable that myself and Treasury Ministers chaired just before the end of last year. It is, as you say, as the Honourable gentleman says, a voluntary relationship that we're talking about. But I have to say that the banks all recognise the absolute critical importance of the Post Office in giving access to banking services to their customers, particularly in the light of recent high street closures with banks, and that's something that's obviously shared from the government.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Sarah Olney.
Thank you very very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for the advanced side of his statement, and I promise to set a good example for colleagues by keeping my response brief. As the Minister has laid out, responses to the consultation underscored the importance of post offices as community hubs, which provide vital services, not least to NHS patients, for the delivery of important medical correspondence. 99.7% of the population live within 3 miles of a post office, and 4,000 of these branches are open 7 days a week. And this is an increasingly important statistic, considering the rapid closure of high street services such as banks over the past decade. Now, the Minister has said that at least 50% of the network must be full-time and full-service branches. So many people rely on the post office to provide vital services. So can I ask the Minister to confirm that we will not see a reduction of full-time branches, and that he will ensure that opening hours continue to meet the needs of working people? The Minister also referenced the important community banking service that post offices provide, but he didn't provide specific assurances to the House about other services provided by the post office, such as DVLA services and passport office services. He's mentioned expanded digital services, but this will not be a help to many of our constituents in this place who live in remote areas with poor broadband access or difficult phone service access. So can he provide a commitment that the post office will continue to provide these physical services to those people who will have difficulty accessing DVLA passport services digitally? And so can he commit that these will remain in post office branches beyond March 2026, and will he commit to multi-year contracts with the, in particular with the DVLA? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
I thank her for those questions and for welcoming today's statement. Firstly, on the 50% additional protection that we are bringing in that she references. Just to reassure, in addition to maintaining the network of 11,500 post offices, the access criteria, so 99% of the UK population to be within 3 miles of their nearest post office outlet, 90% to be within 1 mile of their nearest post office outlet, 99% in deprived urban areas to be within 1 mile, 95% of the total urban population to be within 1 mile, 95% of the total rural population to be within 3 miles, and then the additional protection for particularly rural areas of 95% of the population in every post office postcode district to be within 6 miles. They will all be maintained, which should reassure with that. The point she makes about ensuring that post office hours match people's lives is something that's actually happening. Postmasters are doing that already. I visited a post office in Acton where they stay open weekends. They are open till 11 p.m. so that other retailers, other grocers, can come and put their takings in. So postmasters are doing that. And then finally, with regards to government services, it's exactly because we recognise the importance of post offices for vulnerable people, for people for who, whatever reason, might struggle with the choices that many other people are making about accessing government services online. Because we recognise the importance of that, that's one of the key reasons we're keeping the network at the level it is at the moment. But as I mentioned in my statement, we're also doing work across government to look at that idea of the single front door for face-to-face government services and the role that the Post Office can play in that. So we're looking to enhance that role that the Post Office plays.
Tom Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the announcement of £483 million to invest in our post offices around the country, and I join the Ministry in thanking our postmasters and our postal staff, particularly in my constituency at Southbourne Grove, Malmesbury Park, Hengstbury Head and Sea Road. What happens in the Royal Mail affects our postal services. It's unavoidable. So I will say that I have some concern about the adoption of the optimised delivery network in Bournemouth and broadly, but my question to him, and we were at a meeting with the Post Office fairly recently, a private discussion around their future. Does he agree with me that the work of government in this area is key, but also to build pride in our communities, to tackle antisocial behaviour, to have a diversity, a mix of offer on our high streets, because that really is the only way in which we truly regenerate our high streets in Bournemouth and across the country?
I thank my honourable friend for those questions, and I pay tribute to his own campaigning for his own high streets, and in particular for his local post office network. He's absolutely right that this response recognises the importance of post offices as an anchor in high streets. They help drive footfall. The community hub model that the Post Office are piloting is an example of how we can build on that and expand on their role as an anchor in the high street. But he's right, this has to be seen across that wider effort that we're undertaking to make high streets somewhere where people would choose to go, to make them more attractive, to make them places where people will choose to go to shop because they are not just part of the community. High streets and the high street businesses are where our community is made.
Mike Wood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. King Swinford is the largest town centre in my constituency, but it's been without a post office since the Mid-Counties Cooperative closed the store in which the post office was located. That loss has become even more significant since Lloyds Bank announced this month that it was closing the only bank in the town centre. So the Minister's spoken about retaining a minimum post office network, but what will the government do to help reopen post offices in those town centres like King Swinford that do not currently have a post office?
He makes a really important point, and it can be really devastating when a post office closes, particularly in a small community. There will always be churn within the network. There will be businesses that succeed and fail as post offices. Obviously, our job is to make sure that the overall criteria are there and that the overall level of access is there for people. But with regards to this question of what can we do to bring businesses and post offices back to areas like that, that's exactly why the transformation investment that we're putting in is so important, because that's what makes the overall business profitable, but it's also what enables the post office to give a better deal to postmasters, which makes it a more attractive business to open in communities like his.
Adam Thompson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. High streets in towns like Long Eaton have come under growing strain in recent years, not least because of widespread bank closures. But around 1 in 5 people are still not using online banking, a group that disproportionately includes older and disabled residents. So I'm fighting hard for the establishment of a banking hub in Long Eaton. Given the clear need for accessible financial services, though, what role does the Minister envisage for post offices in supporting the regeneration of high streets in Erewash, and what support is he providing to strengthen the post office's financial services?
So I thank him for that question, and again I pay tribute to him for the campaigns that he runs in defence of his local high streets. As I said, just before the end of the year, we brought together Post Office Limited and the high street banks to begin that discussion about the future of banking and financial services within the Post Office, and the role that that plays, not just in ensuring that people have access to those banking services, but also the role that that plays in bringing footfall into local high streets. I think that the amount of the revenue that Post Office receives from the financial services and banking side of its business has doubled over a period where, for example, the revenue from volume of letters has declined. So we're absolutely clear about the importance of banking services to the future of local high streets through the post.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I have a particular interest in this matter because the world's oldest post office is in Sanquhar in my constituency, which has operated continuously since 1712, despite some scares in recent years, and the Minister would be very welcome to visit it. But I would urge him to get some urgency into the discussion with the banks, because I think there is significant confusion between the banking hub legislation and rules and the role of the post office. And for example, in Sanquhar, although the Bank of Scotland have provided a banking advisor to come to the community after the closure of the branch, they won't allow that person to meet people within the post office. And likewise in Moffat, where we had a bank closure, the post office will not operate a vitally important cash machine which is required in that community. So will he increase his effort to get the banks and post offices together to get a coordinated approach?
I was, Madam Deputy Speaker, going to make a cruel joke about him remembering the opening of that, but I'm too fond of him to make that joke, so I won't. He pays tribute to that post office. I'll gladly visit, perhaps on the way back to my constituency from Parliament one weekend. I have relatives in his part of the world, so perhaps I can double up. Look, I mean, we absolutely understand the centrality, as I've just mentioned, of banking services to the sustainability of the post office. We had that round table, even though the banking framework has just been renewed. We've already started those conversations. Ultimately, that will be a conversation between two sort of commercial entities, but we are facilitating that because we recognise the importance of it.
Jessica Toll.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last year, I ran a community campaign to save Westbourne Post Office, which mobilised thousands. It was kept open. I also put pressure on Post Office Limited to reopen a full-service post office in Bournemouth Town Centre after the WH Smith closed. One is now opening again in May. Now, residents shouldn't have to fight so hard for their post offices. They provide a vital lifeline, especially to older and more vulnerable residents, to access government services and to our local businesses, as we have heard. So can the Minister tell me how he will ensure that post offices remain a fixture of our high streets and play a really crucial role in revitalising our high streets and town centres?
Well, she was a constant campaigner on behalf of local post offices, and I'm not surprised that she's had that victory. And I'm looking forward to visiting her constituency, and perhaps she can show me the local, or introduce me to the local postmasters while she's here. I mentioned earlier the transformation programme that we're funding, which is ultimately the way that while there will always be churn within the network and some businesses closing and some reopening, that should be a part of a natural cycle rather than because of business distress. And the transformation programme is about making sure that there is good postmaster remuneration so that the business succeeds. And I'll continue to work with her to make sure that the post offices in her constituency, but everywhere, thrive.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Government's commitment to retain the minimum network size of 11,500 post office branches. The Minister will know that this is an issue that I have campaigned on extensively, not least because I do not have a single bank branch in my entire constituency. There is a particular need for post offices in rural areas where other service provision is limited. So could he set out what support will be given to help rural villages like Kelsall and Threepwood, where the post offices are closing, and despite every effort, there has been no possibility of reopening a branch in those villages?
Thank you. And I remember when I responded to the debate where she was campaigning vociferously on behalf of local post offices in our constituency, and I think today is tribute to the campaigning of her and other members on these issues. I also remember her telling me not only do you not have a post office, she doesn't have a McDonald's either, which is extraordinary. Again, I think we are maintaining the access criteria where the post office has to maintain accessibility to people in rural areas. But ultimately, it's by making the business profitable and remuneration of postmasters attractive that we do what she's seeking to achieve.
Scott Tarser.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In a previous statement, I learned that the directly managed post office in Wester Hales and Edinburgh South West was to close. A really concerning time for the community, but Mohammed Arsad and his sons Amir and Adam, they stepped up and they absorbed the service into their shop, Plaza News. Residents now have longer opening hours to access the services, where they can use banking, they can pay bills, and they can also do things like get their passport checked. And it's the most British of places, Madam Deputy Speaker. You can queue up to send your parcel via Royal Mail, Parcel Force, DPD, and if you're feeling brave, Every, at the same time as browsing wool, knitting needles and knitting patterns in the aisle. It's a fantastic place. So whilst the transition was concerning, particularly when the news first broke, I really do think the community's ended up in a better place. So can the Minister reassure Mohammed and his sons what's been announced today is only going to enable them to serve their community more rather than less. Thank you.
I'm very happy to reassure Mohammed and his sons on that, but also to thank them for the work that they do for the community. He mentions the post office staying open. That's typical of postmasters who are not just running a business, they also have this really clear sense that they're serving their community. And that's why getting this right and succeeding with the vision that we set out in this Green Paper is so important.
Andrew George.
Speaker. I welcome the statement and I welcome the opportunity to meet the Minister to discuss these issues. And, a lot of people are talking about the question of either reopening post offices, which indeed the Post Office want to see reopen, or to avoid closure. And he knows that it all comes down to the remuneration. Because, as he will have heard from a post office operator, that they need to sell at least 450 stamps every hour in order just to achieve the national minimum wage level of remuneration. Now, that clearly is the reason why in Portleven and Newlyn, where the post office want to reopen post office, no one's interested in taking those services on. So what can the government do to ensure that the remuneration levels are at a sufficient level to ensure that the network targets that he's outlined today can be achieved?
Well, I thank him for taking the time to meet with me to make the case for post offices within his area, which he did with some passion. I am left in no doubt, not just from conversations with him and other honourable members, but also with postmasters about the importance of ensuring the post office is able to improve remuneration for post offices, because that's how we ensure that the network thrives and survives. And that's why we're putting that £500 million into network transformation, so that the whole business, including those in honourable members' constituencies, are sustainable.
Danny Beales.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome today's statement and the Government's response to the Green Paper, and in particular the commitment to 11,500 branches and branches being focused on high streets and a focus on accessibility. In light of this, does the Minister agree with me that it's ridiculous that the Uxbridge branch of the Post Office is set to close this May? And today we found out that TG Jones, the current operator, has withdrawn from the contract for a future branch and ended their search for a replacement. Will he join me in urging Hillingdon Council to pull their finger out, to stop blaming others and to do all they can to secure a new site, including using their own assets if necessary, and join me in urging the Post Office to ensure we maintain a post office in Uxbridge Town Centre?
Hear, hear. Thank you. I'll perhaps use more parliamentary language than my honourable friend does, but absolutely I would encourage everyone to work together to ensure that his constituents do have access to postal services. And I recognise, while there's obviously good news today in terms of maintaining the overall post office network and the access criteria, that's little comfort if you are in a community where that churn of post office services is happening. And I'll very happily work with him on the issue he raises.
Blackman.
There's an issue in rural areas about the loss of post offices, but there's also an issue in cities about the loss of post offices, particularly when your local transport network doesn't necessarily join you with the post office. My community are still reeling from the loss of the post offices in Spar as it closed those. Will the Minister give us some comfort that he believes that the remuneration package that is being offered will not just keep postmasters in the job, but will encourage new postmasters to take up the job, particularly when we have, as has been stated, another round of Bank of Scotland closures?
She makes a really important point about the impact of the closure of a post office in a local area. And as I said a second ago, we are maintaining the overall network, but that still means that there are areas where there are issues. We obviously directly as government don't set the remuneration, but what we do is support the post office through its transformation to make sure that they are profitable enough so that they can make running a post office business more attractive. And that's ultimately the long-term answer to the issues in her constituency, but across honourable members' constituencies.
Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Minister's statement in which he referred to post office being multi-carrier parcel hubs, and one such carrier is Every, who I visited the depot of in my constituency of Hemel Hempstead last week with the G&B London region rep Danny Egan, and I met with dedicated couriers who were doing vital and often undervalued work. And I wondered how the government plans to support private couriers and companies who are willing to work alongside trade unions to ensure that these workers too get better pay and conditions.
Well, he's, as always, a doughty fighter for the rights of working people. My honourable friend, the Employment Rights Minister, has just disappeared, was here a moment ago, has obviously brought through important changes to make sure that there is a floor of decency in terms of people's working environment. And I know that Ofcom are particularly looking at other private parcel couriers and the service that they provide, and I'll certainly work with my honourable friend on these issues.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Following an exemplary local campaign and petition, it's a relief to record that the Post Office has just reversed its decision not to reopen the Post Office in Lyndhurst, often referred to as the capital of the New Forest. So may I ask the Minister, can he explain whether there is any overall government plan to try and coordinate this disappearance of banks with the emergence of banking hubs and the expectation that post offices will take on some banking responsibilities? Wouldn't it be a possible source of income for post offices if they could perhaps charge the banks for providing a service to undertake to take in checks on accounts held by those bank branches? At the moment, I believe it's very hit and miss which banks you can pay their checks into a post office and which ones you can't.
So I think most banks do provide services. I know there's recently been issues around Lloyds and the availability of cheque cashing. I'm really pleased to hear that the Lyndhurst branch has been saved, and I congratulate him and campaigners on that. The banking framework is an increasingly important part of post offices' income, and exactly that sort of relationship where the post office is paid for providing those services that have disappeared because of high street branches. That's exactly at the heart of that, and it's so important to the financial stability and future of the post office.
Right. Deputy Speaker, one of the key services which the Post Office supports in North Norfolk is our bank hubs. These are crucial to our market towns which have lost high street banks and those living in nearby villages. However, I'm frustrated at the number of banks who fail to provide crucial services in these hubs. I note his comments about the voluntary and commercial basis of participation, but can you tell me if he's considered reviewing the Financial Services and Markets Act itself to widen the requirement to include access to banking services, which would be of huge help to my rural residents and businesses?
Thank you. He makes an incredibly important point. I've only been a minister for 4 months, but I've already learned it's not a great idea to trespass too far into Treasury Minister's territory. But I'll certainly discuss the issues, the point he raises with colleagues there. And obviously our overall strategy is to make sure that there is access to financial services through the Post Office in as wide a range of communities as possible.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his statement, and I welcome the commitment he has given to maintain the minimum network size of 11,500 and all 6 geographical access criteria. Now, currently 79% of the network is a full service branch. So can I ask the Minister to explain why the government has set the new 50% requirement so much lower than that? Is this to allow the Post Office to downsize by stealth?
No, it isn't, because all 6 of those criteria remain, and they will guarantee that accessibility to the fuller range of services that the Post Office provides. So I'm happy to give him that reassurance.
Very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't think it will have surprised any of us to hear the Minister talk about the level of response from our community saying how much they value physical post office services. I know my constituents in High Lane and round the Five Ways in Hazel Grove still mourn the loss of their physical post office branch. But when I was talking with Post Office Limited and local retailers after those closures, they talked about how it just wasn't viable to offer those services, the remuneration, but also the business model just wasn't fit for what fit in with their needs. The Minister in his statement talked about the desire to reduce the reliance on government funding, but also looking at additional services like prescription collection. So I wonder if he could talk a little bit more about where he sees the business model overall going for Post Office to ensure that running a post office or delivering post office services is viable so that my constituents get the services they need where they need them.
So obviously the business model of the post office would be a matter for the post office, but what they would say to me is that it's about continuing that central role of banking and financial services through the post office. It's about experimenting with new models like the Hub of the High Street, where they can partner with other organisations that perhaps don't want the full expense of their own high street presence, but can use the vast network of the post office to agree that. And then finally, it's about particularly the technological transformation that we're funding, which will improve the customer experience and improve the remuneration for sub-postmasters.
Final question, Helen Morgan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Government's announcement today that it's going to maintain 11,500 branches, but in my constituency, outreach services that were only available maybe for an hour or two each week anyway, in Cockshut, Clive, Western Rin, Knockin, West Belton and Ryton 11 towns, have all been lost because of the retirement of a single postmistress in Trevonen. So the current criteria haven't protected those services, and the distance criteria aren't incredibly helpful when there's no public transport that can be relied on. And if you're a business, it's an incredible time waste to get in the car and drive 3 or maybe 6 miles to another post office to post something. So what can the Minister say to my constituents who are faced with long journeys to get to post offices? What likelihood is there of a post office reopening in their area, and how will that help them deal with these access problems of public transport and efficiency when they're running their businesses?
She makes a really important point, and my honourable friend asked me the question about isn't this part of a wider need to regenerate high streets. I think it's also true that it has to be part of a wider strategy to support rural businesses like the ones she mentions as well. I've spoken many times about what we're going to do to improve postmaster remuneration through the transformation investment that we're putting in. Perhaps before I sit down and we move on to the next statement, I can also encourage, because I think there is a new generation of postmasters coming through, and not only is it a fantastic business opportunity for people, it's also an extraordinary opportunity to serve their community and become really a key and valued figure, particularly within communities like hers.
At the end of the statement, I'll allow the Minister to exit the chamber.